Well, that certainly spices things up, doesn't it? So after plugging away for several laps, gradually getting messier, running off track, Max and Lando finally collided, wrecking both their races and raised several questions about both drivers. Whose fault is it? Well, that seems to depend on who you're a fan of the most. Now, if you're a Lando fan, you'll say Max was moving under braking and pushing him off the track. And if you're a Max fan, well, I think you'll say that Lando's relentless dive bombing and lack of patience eventually caught up with him. Either way, I think you can say that neither driver has come away from this in a good light. However, two drivers which I think drove superbly and benefited greatly from this incident was George Russell and Oscar Piastri. Both were right in there to catch the ball that was fumbled so badly by Max and Lando. George capitalised the most to secure his second Grand Prix victory, but Oscar was so close, painfully close, to scoring his maiden Grand Prix victory. Had qualifying been a different story, and there'd been a few more laps in the race, Piastri will have been well within a shout of winning that race. There will be a video about George coming up soon, but it's mainly Oscar that intrigues me right now. One driver has the experience but lacks maturity, one driver has maturity and lacks experience. I'll let you guys figure out which one's which. I just sensed that when trying to overtake Max, had Lando just applied a bit more patience, he would have found a place eventually to make a move stick. Now, I'm aware he had limited time to make a move because of tyre degradation and closing laps, but had Lando had a cooler and maybe a slightly mature head on him, he would be on the top step of the podium. Now, don't get me wrong, Norris has become a great driver and one of the few out there that can actually knock Max and Red Bull off their perch. But I think what he lacks still is the ability to counter a Max Verstappen who knows he's in trouble and will make the car as wide as possible to block any overtaking attempts, and sometimes even sacrificing his own race in the process. Now, Max, I think, is much more along the lines of Schumacher or Senna, where they will push the rules to their very limits, and Lando will need to learn how to counter this with Max moving forward. Although what I've been very impressed by, ever since day one actually, is Oscar Piastri's mature approach. Granted, he's only in his second season of F1, but if he was in Lando's shoes, he may not have even closed the gap to Max, but I would put that more down to a lack of experience rather than raw talent. What Norris, you might say, lacks in maturity and patience, I think Piastri more than makes up for this in spades. And when you consider that Norris is currently in his 6th season of F1, it's fascinating to think what sort of driver we might find in Oscar Piastri when he starts his 6th season. Now, whilst Piastri may not yet have that ability that Norris seems to exude so effortlessly, in time, if McLaren do continue to make leaps, could Piastri evolve into the more complete driver? Now, throughout the years in F1, there have been many drivers out there that have displayed such natural skill and flair and ability, but because they couldn't keep a lid on their emotions, or maybe even sometimes their temper, they didn't get to where they should have. Now, Lando has many good years ahead of him, I'm sure. However, if he is to mount a serious title challenge for 2025, then this is an area that I think he really needs to work on. Now, of course, when you're fighting Max Verstappen, who can sometimes pull off some scallywag moves, you need to have that level head to overcome this and come out the bigger man. Looking back a bit, Mika Häkkinen did this brilliantly when he was facing Michael Schumacher for the championship. Granted, it almost nearly did break the man, and it did push him to the very limits of his natural ability, but he came out the other side and he's got 2 World Championship trophies in his cabinet. Now, maybe that could be a massive help. Maybe Lando needs to have a couple of chats with Mika. Now, if everything proceeds with McLaren as we expect, they should be able to mount a serious title challenge for 2025, and Lando needs to be absolutely ready for this. However, what might cause Lando trouble is Oscar's rate of development, especially in areas that he tends to struggle in. If Lando has a good car in 2025, guess what? Oscar is going to have a good car as well. He'll also have another season's worth of experience under his belt, and he may not be all that happy to let the team revolve around Lando Norris anymore. Now, it's not fair to compare both drivers' outright performances. Lando was driving at McLaren through a very strange transitional period right in the thick of the Mercedes and Red Bull dominant times. And I'm talking proper dominance. Remember when every podium was Ham ver Bot or Ham Bot ver? It was like every single week. Now, Norris did get some great results during this period, but he also threw some away due to a lack of maturity and lack of experience, which is fine for a young driver in his 2nd or 3rd year. But even now, there's little things with Norris that just seem to creep in and raise doubts. such as his head dropping when the slightest thing goes wrong, or being so visibly disappointed if he's beaten by his teammates. From his body language, at times, he just seems, in my opinion, to give off a sulky teenager vibe, despite being 24 years old. Now, flipping this around, Oscar is in his second year and has found himself with one of the most competitive cars that McLaren have produced in well over 10 years. But when you see Piastri in interviews, especially when things haven't gone as planned, or if he's had a poor performance or a disappointing weekend, he exudes a strength of character that is well beyond his years.
It feels like a really good result. I mean, when I finished second in Monaco, I was super happy. Today, it's almost, there's so many what ifs. The VSC at the end, there's so many little things that if they had been a little bit different, when the result could have been so different. So it's a bit hard to ignore those right now, but no, very, very happy, and yeah, some good points, another podium. And yeah, after starting in 7th, didn't really expect that.
And yeah, sure, he does have this kind of Aussie, no worries kind of thing about him. But how he's able to just brush things off and pick himself up when he's down has been very impressive so far. Now, we're still yet to see how Piastri would exactly react after retiring from a race that he was certain of winning, especially if he got bumped off or if he had a situation like Lando maybe had with Max. Of course, he hasn't found himself in that situation yet, but it would still be fascinating to see. But also we have to consider the factor of pressure and how both drivers would react to it. And I think in this area, I would say Norris has the advantage here. During a race, if he needs to turn it on and close the gap to Max, just like he did in Austria, he can do it, no problem. But as we saw, it's just keeping his cool whilst overtaking and maybe just having a little bit more patience. Now, there are certain expectations held for Norris by McLaren, and he knows that he needs to deliver because he is, of course, the team leader and also the senior driver. But this, I sense, isn't applied to Piastri just yet, especially in the same way. So perhaps next year, when there are some bigger targets placed on him and some higher expectations, his response could really be make or break time for him, especially if he wants to be a big player in Formula One. I suppose ultimately in terms of growth and development, with Lando Norris we are seeing the accumulation of his 6 years of experience in Formula One. He's very quick, he's very sharp, and ever since scoring his maiden victory, he has a newfound sense of confidence about him. But it's also a confidence which perhaps may get him into trouble. But I can't seem to ignore that with Oscar Piastri, we are just seeing the result of him just starting 2 seasons. Now extrapolate this over time and hopefully McLaren will continue to give him a competitive car. Could Piastri in fact be the more complete, safe pair of hands driver? Lando Norris may have his flaws, but relying on his outright pace alone perhaps could still beat a supposedly complete Piastri. So I do wonder if these two do continue to grow and develop positively, could McLaren perhaps find themselves with a bit of an inconvenient problem later down the line? Although they both come across very well together in interviews and promo and PR, etc., remember, that's all for show. They're at work. This is their office. They are just colleagues. I really don't know why, but I think their actual relationship could be very different and are maybe not the best mates that McLaren put them across to be. I think when it comes down to it as well, both of them are very different people as well, with very different outlooks and approaches to how they drive in Formula One. Going back and when we saw how Norris reacted and how he was visibly to Piastri winning the sprint race, it showed a side of him that I haven't really been able to shake. And he was absolutely gutted and didn't show much happiness for Piastri, and quite rightly so, because this new guy just swanned in and finished first place before he did. Now, if in 2025 or even for the second half of this year, if McLaren do have a car that is capable of winning races on merit, Norris will now have that extra fire to rack up victories and put one over on Max. He's probably got one hell of a vendetta against him now. But also with Piastri, I'm sure that he has now made it his target to win a Grand Prix before the season is out, because he showed us that he's very, very nearly there, and had qualifying different on Saturday, he very easily could have caught up with George and won the race. And if Piastri did score his maiden victory, that would make next season very interesting, with the pair of them both entering the 2025 season level on wins. So overall, I would say yes, absolutely, Piastri is maturing faster than Norris, and it has probably been built into him from the start. Let's not forget, Mark Webber is his manager, and he is probably a very cool guy to have in your corner. However, despite Norris being more experienced and much more volatile, he is McLaren's main bet to try and snatch a victory away from Red Bull. Now, I'm not sure how long this will last for, but if Piastri continues to grow at this rate, he could make life very hard for Lando Norris and also McLaren, who I'm sure don't want to make any difficult decisions regarding their drivers. But with this anyway, do let me know what you think in the comments about Piastri and Norris. Who do you think is going to develop into the more complete driver? Who are you supporting right now? Let us know your thoughts. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, give us a like as well, and as always, I'm Paul, and I'll see you later. Cheers.